So we just wrapped up our chat with today's guest, who's Gaurav Tiwari. Really, really great conversation, talking about wide-ranging, as it often does. It went a little bit philosophical as well, but specifically talking about things like the semantic layer. Really good chat. What did you guys think?
I loved this episode. I think it's only because it touches on a topic that's close to my heart, something that we've discussed previously in the past, which is self-serve. And I think what Gaurav did was help take it to the next level, that conversation, which is about using AI and generative AI and large language models to make self-serve a reality and how we might go about that. And as you mentioned, Dara, there was an element of philosophy that went into it, which I really like. I think some of these topics, it's hard to have them at a purely intellectual and factual level. I think you need to start discussing some of the philosophical elements of these topics. And I don't know, I really liked him, and I think he's someone I'd love to bring on, put in front of the Crap Talks audience and give him a voice there, because I think he'd be fantastic.
I really like the way that we went as well, kind of slightly different direction, but equally valuable. I think that not a lot of people talk about is that kind of going into the where the hell do you start and what actual people and teams do you need to be able to utilize generative AI, semantic and reporting layers, and kind of talking about data democracy and self-serve analytics as a whole, because it's so easy to go straight into the kind of like the kind of future vision of stuff, but then also not considering things like the philosophy like you mentioned, but also like how the hell do you even start this? Like sometimes it assumes you have a sort of a team of data and data scientists of like 50 people to be able to do the kind of stuff that theoretically we talk about. So grounding it that way I think was really useful as well. And just just it's just such a fascinating and interesting episode. So be sure to stick through to the end when we hear the not so rapid fire questions. And thanks to Gaurav, I think we're going to have to start renaming these because I suppose in hindsight, they're not really rapid fire when we're asking kind of like these very big, grandiose questions. But a couple of plugs quickly. So remember to check the show notes for all the links that we talk about in today's episode. Also find links to join the Slack community for Crap Talks, where me, Bav, Dara are over there kind of chatting away and get involved and ask us stuff over there, as well as loads of other people in all sorts of different fields around analytics. We're on video, so if you're not aware already or haven't checked us out, check out my amazing Star Trek Christmas jumper as we record this one that I managed to show flash on the end. And yeah, and just a reminder, if you jumped in on this episode and you've not heard any more, this is Dara's penultimate episode with us as a kind of main co-host. We're at the end of this series. We have one more episode left of this series. It's going to be a special episode. It's our 100th episode, and it's Dara's final episode. So we've got something special in store for him and for everyone else as well. So be sure to check us out next week and to see all the goodies we've got in store for that. All right. Well, look, plugs over. Thank you so much for checking us out. Stick through, enjoy the episode, and we'll see you over on the Slack community.
Hello and welcome back to the Measure Pod. We're delighted to be joined today by Gaurav Tiwari. So Gaurav, firstly, big warm welcome to the Measure Pod, and thank you for agreeing to come and chat to Bav, Dan and myself.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here, and I'm really looking forward to it.
So we always say this, Gaurav, rather than me doing a really bad job of introducing you and getting everything wrong, we'll turn it over to you. So in as much or as little detail as you like, maybe give us a little whistle-stop tour of your background and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Gaurav, and I have been working in the field of data analytics engineering for about 10 years now. And this has been a wild journey that has led me to spend my time across multiple countries, multiple places, and I've been fortunate enough to do that. And as of recently now, I work at Spotify as an engineering manager, which is somewhat a bit of a different place than data specifically, but does revolve around data, as I lead teams which are very much focused on the back-end side of things or the front-end side of things over the last 2.5 years or so. But other than that, the career, the trajectory that I have been on has started off from being a data engineer myself, and then being a data analyst, leading data teams, setting up structures, setting up architectures and whatnot, right? So that's something that I've been focusing on for the last 10 years, as I said. And yeah, that's a bit about myself around what I've worked on.
Awesome. Well, Gaurav, I managed to, I think, corner you, or one of my colleagues cornered you at an event the other week, or at least at the time of recording. So you did an amazing talk presentation at the London Analytics Meetup back at the end of November 2023, and yeah, do you know what? It was one of those presentations. Then I think you even said the point that if you had more questions at the end of it than when you started, then you've done your job effectively. Basically, it's been a good presentation, and I have 1,000 questions, and I'm not sure I am any clearer about a lot of them, but I feel like I learned a lot at the same time. So I'm feeling confused. So how about you give us a quick whistle stop tour around that presentation, what you spoke about, and maybe why I'm scratching my head here.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was one of those things which I've been thinking about for quite some time. And during the downtime between work, I've been thinking about how the notion of self-serve analytics, which is what we call for users, where non-technical users can basically explore data, build analysis, make insights, action on them, is evolving as we go now. So there are quite a few players out there who are trying to solve that problem. And since we are living in this place where you can't speak a single sentence without introducing the word AI in it, so I thought what that means for us going forward, right? And what would a world look like if we talk about empowering people with AI to be able to make those kind of decisions or do self-serve analytics, right? And I spoke about a little bit more on how I, throughout my 10 years working in this field, how I've seen evolution in terms of the different ways people have done analytics so far. And it started off from like very basic things where someone builds up a dashboard for you and basically look at that, to the part where we had some interactivity where someone started like, oh, you know what, you can do some filtering as well. So now you don't have to build a dashboard for every single country to say, so you can wrap it all up in one go. To the point where we had like web-based things, self-serve analytics tools, which essentially helped you to create your own small visualization or small dashboard by yourself, right? And then where we are, that's kind of the point where I see where we are. And I started realizing throughout my time that it's good. It's definitely much better than 10, 15 years ago where we were. But is that still the way to go? Is that the way that we will see people using analytics going forward? And I felt from my experience, from me working and setting up analytics platforms for different companies, I felt that that's really not the solution. And generally speaking, if you're speaking about self-serve analytics as a way to empower people, are people actually being empowered right now? Because there is data and studies that suggest otherwise. So something like 30% of the total population in a company are actually empowered to do that. So that's 1 in 3. If self-serve is so beneficial, why still there is a 1 in 3 chance that people are not able to use it, right? And what I said something which I think resonated very well with the audience there was, if it takes you 3 levels of certifications to say that, yeah, I'm an expert in a self-serve analytics tool, it's not really self-serve now, is it, right? Because you need some sort of like education to be able to do that. And this has not just impacts on the side of end users, but also from a data team point of view, it is quite a big amount of overhead, because when users can't use self-serve analytics tool, who is going to help them is the data team, right? And on an average, studies show that it takes on an average around 4.5 days for a data analyst to build up a dashboard, which is quite significant when you talk about we are using self-serve analytics tool, right? And the same study suggests that almost 50% of your data team's budget is wasted on those ad hoc tasks, which is still quite significant, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the big challenges is that, especially when we think about the current data landscape, there is this, I think, a misinterpretation of the term self-serve. I think a lot of people think self-serve means, hey, here is a suite of dashboards that you are now self-serve. But actually, self-serve doesn't mean that at all. Self-serve analytics is more around empowering users to go deeper and explore those dashboards. So the dashboard might be a starting point, but it is by no means the end point. And I think I don't know, Gaurav, if you said, you listened to the episode, but self-serve is a passion project of mine for many years. and it's been also the biggest failure of my life. So I'm keen to understand like why you feel like this is something worth tackling.
I've done implementation around self-serve analytics in across different roles. So one of the roles which I worked as a manager for the BI team, we introduced Tableau as a self-serve analytics tool, and basically went from not having anything to a point where like almost 600 people were using that tool altogether. And there were quite a lot of learnings from there. We set up a lot of architecture infrastructure to be able for users to be empowered to do that. But yet, even after all of that, it just, as you mentioned about the failure part, we still spent good amount of time explaining users how to use self-serve analytics. We spent good amount of time helping them like, oh, this dashboard, I was trying to make this, but instead it did that. How do I fix this, right? And it's like, you might as well just do it yourself, right? So I think that's why I feel like this is a problem worth thinking, because every organization that I've been to asks the same question. Oh yeah, this is a data, but how do I use it now? Like, oh, yeah, you have Tableau, but what? Like, how do I drag and drop? Yes, but if you drag and drop a measure, it becomes an average or a sum. What should I be using? That's the part that I feel like it needs to be tackled. Yeah.
But 600 people is successful. That seems successful to me, right? 600 people in what, I mean, what size is the organization? 600 users. That if it's 600 out of 800 people, that is a successful self-serve program, no?
Yeah. It was about 1,200 people, to be honest. So that's still 50% adoption. But I'm quite proud of that achievement, to be honest. It was at a time where self-serve analytics was like it definitely was not like at the very early stages, but it was also at a stage where there was not a lot of mature products or mature implementation out there. So I spoke at various Tableau conferences or AWS conferences about showing how we implemented that, which is really good. But then as you kind of move from that stage to the next stage of evolution, you realize that there are still some drawbacks that you need to kind of look into.
Is this then like a data literacy? I'm just trying to think, when you said about how, like, you can provide self-serve access to stuff, and then it's like, are they doing an average or a sum or a kind of stupid thing with number? I think that like self-serve is like, I feel like it's trying to tackle too much at once. It's trying to be like, okay, it's data storytelling, it's data visualization, it's accessing databases, it's data literacy at the more foundational level. Like, is there such thing as a self-serve project, or is there more kind of like, we need to make sure that there's a base level of like maturity or literacy at a level where you can trust people to not to mess up a sum calculation or something like that?
You mentioned quite well about data literacy part, because that's something that I was always thinking about. Like, self-serve analytics is supposed to benefit the non-technical audience. Let's say someone in sales, someone in marketing, or someone in operations who is not very much interested in writing SQL queries, but would rather just use the dashboard and create their own things. But what I've observed is there is only a certain amount of threshold until which someone is willing to get their hands dirty on these kind of things. After a certain point in time, that's not what someone joined, or that's not their specialty, right? If, on the contrary, if you were a data analyst and you were told, like, you know what, you're going to spend the next 20 days or 10 days learning how to do sales report, learning how to do sales, talking to people, you might be interested in it, but is that something that you'd want to get super into it? In all probability not, right? So that's where I think providing those trainings, providing that literacy about how to use a tool only goes to a certain extent, because at the end of the day, as a non-technical audience, you have 100 different things to prioritize, and learning how to be more data savvy is not very high on your agenda. And if
I think
that's what I see. Yeah.
We touched on this, didn't we, Dan? And it came down to the motivation levels of someone wanting to pull their own data or needing to pull their own data. Of course, if there is a bottleneck within the data team, you kind of find yourself in a situation where you maybe don't have a choice but to pull your own data. But if the option is there to use to lean on an analyst or a data scientist or something, like, why would someone want to do it themselves? And this is, I think this motivation thing has been, I think, maybe at the heart of why self-serve programs across the industry have maybe not been as successful. Because you're right, there are so many layers of it. I want to move into sort of like the future, but I just wanted to like touch on the fact that I love the fact that you've recognized, and you mentioned it very early on, that actually BI programs and self-serve programs have been on this evolutionary journey from, first building a dashboard, then allowing filterability and, dates and segments. And then it's kind of evolved, but it's still not quite where it should be. So do you think it can be successful anywhere?
I think it very much depends on the environment. So with the current state where we are, it's definitely higher than what it used to be. But when we talk about success and saying everyone is fully aware about what data is, where it resides, how can I make it actionable and make decisions on it, I think there's a long way to go, to be extremely honest. I think there is still that aspect of barrier which leads people to start getting into that world of data. I remember like my first job, anything that was not in an Excel file, people wouldn't touch it, right? Because it's like, can you just, that's the first thing like a lot of people ask, right? Can it export it to Excel or not, right? So I remember, and I work as a consultant in addition, and I see so many organizations where they are still in the same stages. Yes, of course, you can talk about big organizations are like really good startups or something where they are evolved to that maturity level, but still at a very rudimentary level, there are still people who can't process anything other than Excel, right? And that's purely because it gives you that ability to move around and manually edit things, right? So talking about success, I think there's still a long way to go before we get to a point where we say people are actually able to action on that information immediately, to say so.
What do you think would be a good next step? So let's say, the utopian world of self-serve analytics covers everything that Dan touched on. So data literacy, visualization, storytelling, all of those things. Let's say that is the utopian state of self-serve. What would be a fundamental next step that organizations should be looking to achieve, to get to that, onto that journey to self-serve success?
Yeah, that was exactly the question that I asked myself when I was thinking about like, where do we go from here, right? And in an ideal world, when you look at a job description for a data analyst or someone who wants to kind of help out, it's like you want to empower users with data so they can take quick actions and basically don't have to wait 3 days to get that result, right? That's the utopian state in my mind, right? And when I think about that state, I think about barriers that are causing us to not get there. And the most fundamental thing that I think is a language barrier. I think the two parties on different side of things are not speaking the same language. Data person is speaking more on a more SQL or database-ish language, whereas the person on the other side is more interested in the business outcome of that data, right? So I'm interested in making sure that as a data person, in making sure that all of my records have the right data quality, I can sum it up properly, there is no null errors and whatnot, whereas the other side is purely interested in what's the business value out of this information, right? So I think that's, in my opinion, when it comes to self-serve analytics or generally analytics, that's the language barrier that I see needs to be brought down. And when I think about solutions to that, I do see that there is a good role where generative AI can play this particular role to bridge that gap, right? So it's not a new problem space. People have been trying to solve this problem from quite some time. But with the advent of the fact that anyone can spin up an API on OpenAI and basically ask models to create code, which is being used readily, it can be a way to kind of bridge that gap much faster, maybe. So that's where I'm thinking about going forward, yeah.
Isn't that maybe 2 or 3 steps down the line? For example, in order to ask the AI, generative AI, or whatever, to write those APIs or write the SQL query, there needs to be a fundamental understanding of what the data looks like and what's available and how it connects to each other. So, and I know, and I think you're probably going to touch on it, but in terms of the semantic layer or presentation layer, whatever, however you term it, I don't even know what the difference, if there is a difference between those two terminologies, but I've always gone with semantic layer, but there's also the presentation layer. So, would that not be a good first next step, which is that the I don't say the creator of the data, because the creator of the data can be anyone. I guess the people who process that data, they take it upon themselves to ensure that there is this this data layer, this semantic layer, this presentation layer, whatever, that completely matches business terminology, to touch on what you were just talking about?
I understand and I agree that the semantic layer is the place to go. And I think so there's two things that I think about. The first one is, in most of the use cases as a data analyst, you would try to streamline that piece of information that you would like to show in a dashboard already in some sort of a layer. Call it semantic, call it presentation. That's absolutely up to you, right? And try to add in the second point, what you mentioned about business terminology, so that it makes a lot more sense, right? But often and then not, this experience is never to a level where a business user can simply look at that data and basically say that, yeah, I understand everything that's happening there. So I do see that semantic layer is a fundamental aspect of making sure that your user, your AI bot, or whatever that we can talk, can basically use that as a way to get information, right? Because if we just simply tell, let's say you are a new analyst, Pavan, I tell you that this is the raw data from 300 different sources, get me this report, I'm quite certain that's not a very good place to be in, right? So that's where I see that semantic layer is basically a fundamental requirement for us to even get to the point where we want to go forward, right? And that's what's happening today as well.
Is the semantic layer or the presentation layer just the new dashboard in the world of self-serve? I'm just thinking it's a piece of tech sitting in between the end user and the analyst or the data team that has to be maintained and updated and contextualized for them to be able to self-serve. And I'm just and in the power or the magic of editing and scheduling, we should already know everything about semantic layers with our guest David, who would have come out last week, but we have yet to record. So we have no, at the time of recording, we have no knowledge of semantic layers officially. But the thing about all this kind of stuff is like the way that you explained a dashboard right at the very beginning. It's like, okay, it needs to go through this 4-day process on average to be set up by a data person, and then it's then the self-serve can start, or to some extent they can start accessing the data. Now we're saying there's magical stuff to do with generative AI and some awesome clever stuff behind the scenes, but it relies on this other piece of software, which is a layer of context, a presentational layer, which also has to be set up by the data team and has to be maintained by them. And it feels like we're replacing one for another. What are your thoughts on that? Is that the case, or am I kind of getting the wrong end of the stick with this?
I would say it's not entirely exactly where we said we're replacing one thing with another. That's one thing that I would say, that because there are different ways and you can put semantic layer, presentation layer. Everyone calls it very differently. Before it became a term for semantic layer, people used to call it like a reporting layer. There were cubes that were created in the past which were specified for a particular place, right? We used to use the term cubes quite a while back, which was like specifically for a particular market department, right? So I don't think we are quite far away from this. There have been rapid changes, massive changes in how we present it, how we work through it. But the fundamental aspect at the very bare bones remains still the same. Of all the data sets that we have, how can we bring it down to one summarized, cleaned, aggregated way that can be used by our users, be it writing SQL queries, be it funneling into a dashboard, be it making it a self-serve basis, right? What the concept semantic layer has offered is making it much easier, in my opinion, to not parse through those underlying 300 sets, but actually just look at this layer and that's your business layer, to say so, right? So you're not ideally replacing anything or adding new things, right? It's been there since the beginning. It's just different maturity stages, to say so. The part where I see a bit of a challenge, and that's probably will change, is how people use it. How people use that semantic layer is different now, or can change with generative AI. So usage of tools like Tableau or Looker or anything for that sake does require a specific set of knowledge that takes time to build up and takes time to have the confidence to say that I have built this dashboard and I know with a very high degree of certainty that it's the right way to build it. That takes skills and that takes experience to build that, right? And that's the barrier that I think needs to be lowered for more users to adopt using the semantic layer altogether. So that's where I think they see the evolution of future going in now.
And how do you think AI is going to help lower that barrier?
Yeah, I think we have been seeing a lot of use cases where developers, for example, in my team or across, are using Copilot as a way to basically help them with assisting in creating code, right? We also have strong improvements in models for natural language processing, which have seen good benefits in which they can parse a natural language. And that's when I say natural language, that's the common people language, right? That I can write as a technical person or a non-technical person, like, and basically convert that into a code-based knowledge or code-based language like a SQL or a Python code or whichever you would like to do, right? So having that combination of LLM or of these large language models to be able to convert, let's say, a simple natural language to a code that can be used to run analysis, that can be used to run dashboards, is probably where I see AI is kind of helping out to basically uh, bring that barrier down. So if you talk about an example, you are a non-technical person, has no idea, let's say, about SQL or any kind of thing. All you're interested in knowing, like, what is the financial performance for a particular state over the last 12 months? That's the question you have. You don't really care where that information comes from. You're more interested in getting that number in a chart, in a table, or whichever format. That's all you need to know, or that's all you should know. You shouldn't be going into logging into a particular portal, learning how to use that tool, which data sets do I want to use, how do I drag this to make a chart, and things like that, right? So that's where I see the future slowly starting to get towards. Yeah.
Is there a risk? I take the point there that you don't want people having to work really hard to get to a simple answer to a question that they have. But is there some risk? Let's say that's on a spectrum. Is there a risk that if AI makes it too easy, that it actually takes away the motivation or need for the person to use their own kind of curiosity to better understand the data and where it's coming from? Because sometimes you don't want to have to go around the houses, but sometimes you learn by going through that process. You learn some of the nuances in the data, you learn some of the context, that maybe there's a risk that if AI is doing too much of that, that people will be trusting the AI and then making incorrect decisions based on that.
Yeah, I think you're right on that front, that there is certain amount of risk associated for certain. But when I think about it from a decision making perspective, I also think about how many decisions are made right now without even doing any kind of analysis, right? So if you think about going back to that 4.5 days period that I was talking about, that time it takes, if you're a time crunch on a piece of decision as a marketing manager, you have to make, and it takes 4.5 days for you to get the result, whether this is a place where I should spend $100,000 or $1 million. In all probability, you're not going to wait if you're in a time crunch position. You will end up making decisions on, yeah, I think that's the way it should be, and let's just go for it, right? And I've seen that happen more than you would think. So I still think being curious to get answers to that question, and being a bit more rational around whether this makes sense or not is important. And I think right now, marketing, just continuing on the example of marketing manager, they are still doing that. Like back in the days when people were looking at dashboards, they were still looking at those numbers and trying to make inference and understanding whether this makes sense or not. What we are offering, or what I'm thinking about the future, it just enables you to do more without having to get stuck in places, right? And it's like this, the problem remains the same. How much in depth can you go is what everyone is trying to solve, right? Is how much can you know more about that problem in short span of time. So I do see there are some risk associated with that, but I also see that in this time, when time is probably the most important commodity that you have, not enabling or not using these assistive tools will probably have bigger risks, to say so.
In the magic of time travel, I would have already, if I remember, asked David this on the last episode, but I want to ask you now for the second/first time. So the kind of like natural evolution of the technology that we work in. So just take things like ETL, right? It evolved into ELT because processing and storage costs got so much cheaper that it's just throw it in, we'll figure it out afterwards, and then we'll do the transformation once we have it in our own place. Then you kind of go into the world of things like data meshes and kind of connective cross-cloud platforms where you can just, if I access the data, I actually don't need to keep a copy of it. I actually don't need to have my own duplicated data set there. And it became accessibility. And I'm just wondering, with the evolution that's going and the cost of large language models and generative AI right now, if that continues to come down, then would there eventually be a need for a semantic layer or reporting layer in between to provide the clarity and the context when it can crunch 300 different data sets? You can pre-prompt it through a thing like a custom GPT with some contextual stuff, and you're prompting it. The semantic layer becomes prompts. And I'm just wondering if you see it going down that path, and then it truly becomes kind of throw it in and access it galore, right? Everyone can access everything.
I'm smiling a bit because I literally tried doing that last week. So I spent a lot of time in my spare time to kind of try it out, like what happens. So I created a data set with, I think if I remember, about 235 or something different tables, and basically just pointed a GPT model to answer a question which probably could have been solved with just 2 tables. I was like, let's throw it and see what happens, right? It's not as accurate, and that's something that I was thinking about as well, that it's not going to be the place where you would get exactly the most accurate result, because there's just a lot of information to parse through. And within the time that we wait for a GPT or the model to give you an answer, they will make some decisions to basically say, this is the data set that I'm going to use to answer those questions, right? So my answer to that question is, I don't know. It is possible, but in the current context, providing the right context to your model is very important. And that's the key to answer or to get the right answers, right? And when it comes to data, providing a semantic layer is basically providing the right context, in my opinion, right now. If you don't do that, the output will be tricky. Output will be far from what you're expecting. And maybe in future we come to a point where you don't really need the whole idea of semantic layer. But knowing from where we are, it is still a very much of a necessity to provide a good context. And semantic layer does a presentation layer, whatever you call it, does a pretty good job in providing that context. So when it's going back to that example, throwing 235 to 38 model tables to GPT versus throwing those 3 tables to GPT, the output was significantly different, faster and more accurate, to say so, right? So I do think that in the current stage, it is important. Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of our audience are, I suppose, we fly the flags for marketing analytics and product analytics at the moment. So within that kind of context, and I'm not kind of pigeonholing it, all of our audience into those 2 categories. If someone's like, that sounds great, I've heard this word semantic layer, and I like the idea of giving a chatbot to my staff or my team or whatever. Where the hell do you start? Like, if you're in that kind of company that doesn't have a team of data scientists or analysts, maybe there's a small team of people that are dedicated to this, and they're just like, this is an objective for 2024. Where do you start? What kind of tech do you find you have success with, or you think's more accessible right now? And I know that we're doing a slice in time at the day of recording of this, but like, where do people start?
It's very easy to go ahead to ChatGPT on a web-based browser, drop a file, and basically do data analysis to some extent. So if that's also a use case, more power to you, and basically do that. But from a bit more scalability perspective, you would need to think about either leveraging those APIs yourself, or there are so many different providers which are starting to come up on the market now on the scale, which offer something similar, right? So you can basically leverage those tools and basically those stacks to connect to your models, connect to your databases, or connect to your tools. It's for example, you said that if you are in a position where you don't have a data warehouse, you don't follow ELT process, you simply connect to your marketing platforms and basically use their built-in analysis to do that. There are tools out there which now are popping up and outside their beta versions, which can help you in doing that stuff as well, to integrate those things, build those semantic layer that we talked about, and help you answer those questions as well, right? So my suggestion would be to kind of start looking around, because the space is evolving rapidly as we speak every day.
My only, I guess, drawback and thing that I'd be most pessimistic about is that the introduction of a new tool or technology in itself in any organization is a barrier, right? You have to get budget and sign off. You have to go through seats and how many seats and who gets allocated a seat. Once you've got that, you then need to find a way to connect that GPT or that technology to your database, and someone needs to do that, and then that becomes an engineering problem still. And then if the engineering team haven't built a good enough semantic layer that they would trust it, I mean, you said it yourself, you threw 300 tables at a custom GPT model, and it wasn't reliable. But if you had the capacity to do the engineering work to compress that down to 10 tables, that's still going to be a problem that most companies face, is that they're going to have to do the engineering work on the background to be able to get that connected and work. Like it doesn't feel like an easy next step.
Yeah, I agree. It's not like a simple plug and play kind of setup right away, but I won't be surprised. And that's where, when I said that we will end up having more questions going forward, is I won't be surprised that there are tools out there which are trying to help you out. For example, I've been following a few tools, and they are investing heavily not in improving the AI model to generate answers, but solving that aspect that you mentioned, Bhav, about how can we make sure that they are more easier to plug and play? How can they use AI itself to build a semantic layer so that you don't really have to do that kind of plumbing to get to a point where AI can be used to get the answers, right? So I do see that evolution coming in already. Yeah.
And the only reason I bring this up is because over the years, I've been burned many times by the marketing team, typically the marketing team, who have gone out, purchased some technology without speaking to tech, without speaking to engineering, without speaking to the data team. And they're like, hey guys, we've got this platform and it's to do reporting, it's to do experimentation, it's to do blah, blah, blah. But we need to feed it a whole bunch of data. And there's just so much shit in the backlog already that you've now got this new thing that one team is gonna want to integrate. So I guess I wanted to vent for a second there, just so I'm glad I got that off my chest. I feel much better. But who should drive this, right? Like this then becomes a £1 million question. Like who should drive this? Take that first, who should drive an organization to take that first step towards that utopian future that we talked about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I was thinking about it, and when I was putting together this presentation that I spoke on, I thought about this from both. Let's take an example from a marketing perspective, which is a non-technical audience to say so, versus from a technical perspective, from a data team. Let's say you're a chief data or analytics officer at a place. Like, what's in store for you to be able to kind of take the first step here, right? So I thought a lot about, as a data personnel or as a data analytics leader, what's the benefit that you get about it? And that's where I started thinking that amount of budget that you spend on ad hoc data tasks or something is still quite high, or the amount of time that your analysts or basically data engineers or data scientists are spending time to basically answer certain questions, which are one-off, like you ask this question once and never go back to it, is still significantly high. So think about it as an investment into where the future goes. At some point in time, 10 years back, you'd never had the concept of engineer, science, or analyst. They were just wrapped up into one person, and slowly it started evolving. I remember my first role, I worked as a pricing analyst, which was nothing but a data scientist role. But at that time, data science was not even a term to basically use that, right? So I think in that stage, it's a step that benefits both from a marketing perspective as well as from a data or analytics perspective. I see that if tech or data, to say so, takes the first step, it will be a lot more beneficial because they understand the stack and the usage of that stack much better. And I was laughing when you mentioned about a marketing team coming up with saying that this is the tool that we have highlighted so many times, has happened so many times, and you end up redoing the entire pipelines to feed that tool. And that's usually not the way it should be. It should be the other way around, right? So that's my thought process around why we or someone in a data role holds that responsibility or view or the breadth of view to be able to take these kind of decisions and invest in that going forward. Yeah.
So as we come to the end, unfortunately, of our time, I just want to give one last opportunity, Gaurav. So as we go back to the beginning, we probably all have more questions than we did when we went into this one, which is a success because it's a complicated thing and it's not easy. If people wanted to ask you those questions or to get in touch with you in some way, can they? How can they? And where can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an evolving field, and I'm learning and curious myself. So I'd love to have discussions with anyone who is interested. I'm available on LinkedIn, and also, as I said earlier on, run a data analytics consultancy by myself to help businesses scale up their data setup, help with semantic and presentation layer if you want to get into more of that, and of course understand how AI can help them, because in a lot of cases it's just not needed right now. So being able to make that decision and say that that's not the only thing to jump in, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to help out. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll put some links in the show notes.
I was going to say, I think we should get Gaurav to come speak at a Crap Talks event. There'll be loads of questions, I think, there. So, it's the first time I've
why
ever
not?
thought of inviting a guest over to speak at a Crap Talks event. But
it's the start, is it? It's going the other way around rather than the Crap Talks coming on the pod.
Well, this
amazing.
This is the benefit, right, of being having a podcast and a meetup community, so you can bounce between the two. I have one final question before we move. I imagine we want to move into the rapid fire round. That's our favorite round, which is, why do people want to export to Excel?
God, end on that bombshell.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a final question too, so this won't be the last one.
Okay, that's great then. Because you mentioned that, and I think you used, at some point we're going to be able to just go to an AI tool and just say, show me the financial sales for last year, broken, people will still want to export to Excel. Like, why do people want to export to Excel? And this is for anyone, by the way. It's not necessarily directed.
No, I've thought a lot about this as well, and I think it's more psychological than the ease of use. But I think people, when you talk to someone, for example, I'll give one very quick example. If you are sitting with someone and they're operating the computer and you're basically saying, like, can you help me book a flight together? You would want to be as plugged into the screen as you want than the next person who's actually doing that, right? Because it's a psychological thing that you feel you are a lot more in control of what you're doing, as opposed to if someone else is doing that you don't fully understand the way they work, right? So I think when you have that data in Excel or Google Sheets of some sort, maybe Excel more than Google Sheets because it's still collaborative. In Excel, you feel that you have control to change it the way you would like to, and no one else is going to touch it, right? So I think there is something about it that this is my workspace. I have full authority to make changes to this data rather than relying on a database or something that can change. So that's my take on why that could be the case. Yeah.
So to summarize, in that case, it's basically, even with advancements in generative AI and being able to plug and play, ChatGPT type tools into your own data warehouse, the end goal will still be to ask a question and export it into Excel.
I really hope it gets solved into a different interface.
Maybe they just integrate Copilot into Excel. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's Microsoft's plan. That's it. It's all done. That's their front end.
As much as it pains me to say it, I think Microsoft need a lot of credit for this. Like they basically created that familiarity, and that's why everybody still thinks, oh yeah, I can work with data. Give me an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll be comfortable with that. I'm really curious, Gaurav, just to ask you, I would say final, but I've got 5 more questions afterwards, which I'm going to ask you in quick succession. But my last question, based on our conversation, we've obviously talked a lot about, this has all been about empowering business users and even the businesses themselves to understand and use data and make decisions based on it. I'm just curious to know what you think in terms of the wider population. Do you think the advances in technology, including things like AI, are they making people, society, let's say, more or less empowered to understand and use data to make decisions in their own kind of day-to-day lives?
That's a very good question that I need to think. Yeah, I need to think through that. But I think generally speaking, irrespective of where you are in the stage of maturity, of evolution, of data analytics, whatever it is, the part that never dies is the human curiosity to know more about something. And I gave this example in the presentation as well, that I used to study, we call geospatial analytics, to understand geographical positioning of things in my master's. And we could use an open source tool to basically click one button and it would layer up different shape files together. And my professor said, like, what you just did in 3 seconds, 20 years ago, it took us 3 days to do something like that, right? So the level at which we are working and knowing the way we are consuming information, if anything, it does makes our job easier to make us more curious as we go, right? So thinking about AI, there are different ways in which you can do it. Like if you say that AI will be used to do all mathematical operations and therefore kids do not have to learn how to do maths, I have a very different feeling about that, as opposed to saying that for business users, spending 3 days to plumb through the data would be a colossal waste of time, as opposed to using those 3 days to build better actions, right? So I think that's where the part that I go towards is there are benefits, there are cons to relying so much on AI to solve these kind of problems. We just need to be. I think there was some terms around responsible AI as well. I've been following some of the things as well. So that can be that resonates well with me as well. So I think the curiosity for human to know more about things, for businesses to go more detailed to understand every single bit, will always remain the same. If we find out a way to do that very easily, there will be like 3 other things we'll be more curious about to solve as well. So I don't see that that innate desire that we have will die down at any point in time.
Which is the Star Trek future, right? That's how that's the future they depict there. And for those that are watching, not listening, I'm wearing my Star Trek themed Christmas jumper. We're recording just before Christmas, so yeah, I just wanted to end on a Star Trek note. I wanted to get that in there before Dara starts firing questions at you.
No, I liked it as well. It was a nice, optimistic answer. I think maybe I'm slightly more cynical, but I liked your answer. Okay, final 5, rapid fire 5. So first question, what's the biggest challenge today that you think will be solved within 5 years?
I think being able to, I can speak from data very quickly, but in a different application, I think being able to, with the advances in computes resources that we have, being able to solve problems that we don't know yet, for example, pollution, climate changes, being able to solve that at a much higher scale because of the advancement in compute probably will be the biggest enablement, in my opinion, and will probably help not solve, but reach one step closer much faster than we thought we would.
So what will be the biggest challenge then in 5 years' time?
One thing that's very top of mind is responsible usage of anything, of technology, to say so. I don't know if you saw on LinkedIn, like someone basically went to Chevrolet's website and basically trained their GPT to offer a legally binding contract to sell them at Chevrolet Camaro or something for $1. And the GPT actually said, like, yeah, it's a legally binding offer that you'll get a Chevrolet, some 2024 car for $1. So I think how do you get to that responsible usage is going to be a big, big challenge. And legal is going to have a pretty big time, very tough time to say so as we go into future. Yeah.
I'm going to order a Chevrolet straight after this episode.
I'll send you a screenshot of that, Bob. It's amazing. Yeah.
So what's one myth that you'd really like to bust?
I would love for to have a little bit more visibility around the social impact that people are making by saying that, yeah, we are contributing to making the world a better place, right? Or organizations are saying that we are doing carbon emissions, that like we are cutting carbon emissions by doing this. But I think that's still a big myth when you talk about like, oh yeah, are you actually going towards sustainability? How can you prove that? Because I still don't believe the fact that it's actually doing the job that they're claiming it to be.
Do you think
there's still a lot going on?
Do you think B Corps are just another enterprise business that get paid for the number of B Corp licenses that they hand out. It's a good response, actually. I've always wondered this myself.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I think I would love for that myth to be busted out, where what's the actual social impact or environmental impact that we actually talk about. Yeah.
And if you could wave a magic wand and make everybody know one thing, what would that one thing be?
Not related to tech, but generally speaking, the reality of the world. It's God, I feel like my answers are very cynical. Like it feels like they're a bit depressing around it. But I think having traveled different places and having the opportunity or the luck to be able to kind of view different mindsets or view different people and work with them, I think a lot of us do not have full visibility on how different cultures work or how different people work. So being able to be mindful of that and respectful of that, if people can learn that somehow, or basically be aware, maybe not learn is a strong word, be aware of how different cultures behave or how different people react, how different people respond to information, or how we should talk to them, that would be a very good thing to kind of learn, I think, if we are aware of that.
Excellent answer. Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
The last one is easy, I promise, and it is rapid. So what's your favorite way to wind down outside of work?
I genuinely like being out in the open. So I do, or I used to do, and I'm getting back into it, doing a lot of triathlons and runnings. So it sounds contradictory, but I really like going out on a long run, which is like out for 3 hours, which really mentally winds me down, because at that moment, you're just focusing on running. You're not doing anything else. Actually, some of the biggest decisions that I've made came out during that period of time, because you have the clarity of your mind that you can think through things, or basically just wind down. And when you get back home, you basically can just eat something and sleep off. There's nothing better than that.
I get that. As a long distance runner, I can relate. Completely agree. Brilliant. Thank you for answering those not so rapid fire questions, and for the conversation in general. It's been great. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.